The UAE has deployed more soldiers in Yemen's remote island of Socotra. The Gulf country has been expanding its influence not just in southern Yemen, but across the Red Sea and Horn of Africa region. So what's behind this military buildup? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Jane Dutton. The flag of the United Arab Emirates has been raised over public buildings in Yemen's remote island of Socotra. That's near Somalia's northeastern coast. Some locals see it as a power grab at the expense of their internationally recognized government led by the president, Rabbu Mansour Hadi. And the Hadi government says the UAE action is an act of hostility. Formally, they are allies in the Saudi-led war against the Houthi rebels in the capital, Sanaa. But the UAE has promoted separatists in the south and now calls the shots in large parts of that region and Socotra Island. We'll bring in our guests in a moment. But first, Alex Skotopoulos has this report.
Showing support for Yemen's Prime Minister Ahmed bin Dagha, hundreds of Yemenis took to the streets of Socotra as the UAE boosts its presence on this remote island in the Gulf of Aden. The United Arab Emirates flew in soldiers along with tanks and armoured vehicles. They're shown here setting up a security cordon, having expelled local troops from the airport. Yemeni government sources have since confirmed to Al Jazeera that UAE troops have also taken control of the main port and denied the Yemeni Prime Minister and most of his cabinet permission to leave. Situated off the coast of Somaliland, the UNESCO Heritage Site, known to many as the Galapagos of the Indian Ocean, is famous for its unusual wildlife and scenery. But with a 3,000-metre-long runway, ideal for fighter jets and large military aircraft, the island is also situated between the Horn of Africa and Yemen, just beyond the Red Sea and some of the busiest sea lanes in the world.
What they have done here is they have found an island which is very remote from both Yemen and Somalia. It's very far off the coast, but it's very strategically located, and it kind of acts as a quasi-aircraft carrier in the for the UAE in the middle of the Indian Ocean, where they can control traffic. And obviously, if you control the traffic, you can also give favorable access to these sea lanes to companies that are related to the UAE. So it's a military and geopolitical strategy, which is very much linked to the economic strategy of the United Arab Emirates.
Having already invested heavily in Somaliland and expanded the commercial port of Berbera, the UAE's control of Socotra is seen by many as the latest move by the Emirates to spread its influence well beyond its borders.
People have often remarked on the strategic value of Socotra. There have been speculations that one power or another might try to actually establish a presence on the island.
With the war in Yemen entering its fourth year, the UAE now controls much of the south of the country, with a strong presence on both sides of the entrance to the Red Sea and Socotra placed right in the middle. Alex Skotopoulos, Inside Story.
Let's get straight to the story and bring in our guests in London via Skype. Mohammed Jumeh is a writer for Al-Quds Al-Arabi newspaper. In Oxford, Samuel Romani, researcher at Oxford University and specialist on conflict in Yemen. In Beirut, Bethan McKernan, Middle East reporter for The Independent and author of the first eyewitness report on the UAE in Socotra. Very good to have you with us. I'm going to come to you first, Mohammed Jumeh, considering your relationship with the government and your understanding of the way it works. What do you make of the fact that the UAE and its troops on Socotra have refused to let government delegates, including the Prime Minister, leave the island? What's going on there? What sort of statement is that?
Well, I think it goes back to the relationship, the difficult relationship between the government, Hadi's government, and the Emirates. This reminds us of what happened a few months ago in Aden, when there was a conflict between the soldiers and troops related to the Southern Transitional Council, which is supported by the Emiratis, and the troops of the government supported by Hadi's government. Now, yesterday and the day before, we are facing the same stage of this hidden, let's say, conflict between Hadi's and between Hadi and the Emiratis. But it seems that the Emirates want to expand their control over this island because there is no Houthis there, so that they can say, we are fighting the Houthis, we are supporting the government against the Houthis, because this island is in the south and it is in the Indian Ocean.
Exactly, so it takes that excuse away, doesn't it? The Houthis are out of the picture when it comes to Socotra.
The Houthis are not there anyway. All the troops in Socotra are Yemenis, loyal to the Yemeni government, governed by Hadi. But from the Emiratis' point of view, I think they want this important island for its own sites in the country. It is they want this island for its site. It's in the middle, like in the middle between the Gulf and the African Horn, and it's as the Emiratis want to present themselves as a mediator between the West and the East, and this island is very important strategically for Emirates.
Okay, just hold your thought there. Let me just bring in Samuel Romani, if I may, to just go back to what we saw happen in the last couple of hours, the most recent developments, stopping this government delegation from leaving. I mean, do you agree that this is just part of the fallout between the UAE and the Hadi government? Is it a real statement that it doesn't matter where you are, or was it just easy pickings for them on Socotra?
I think it is a sign of a major falling out between the UAE and the Hadi government, because the UAE has lost confidence in Hadi's ability to restore stability and to restore a secular state to Yemen. That's what its primary goal is. Hadi has not achieved a substantial victory over the Houthis since Aden, and that was over 2 years ago. The UAE initially cast their lot with Saleh, and then when Saleh died in December, they cast their lot with the South Yemeni separatists, who are directly combating with Hadi. And now in Socotra, they're finding yet another avenue and yet another place that's strategically important in the Horn of Africa and in Yemen to conflict against the Hadi government. I think this is a sign that the UAE and Saudi Arabia have broadly disagreed over Hadi's long-term viability. The UAE believes he's not viable and that he's lost his legitimacy in his home region and across the country, whereas Saudi Arabia believes he's the only potential bulwark against Iranian expansion in the country.
Bethan McKernan, do you see this as a statement of UAE growing dominance and control in Yemen?
I think so. I think part of the reason that Socotra is so fascinating is it's this mix of the UAE's both hard and soft power strategies, both in Yemen and in the wider sort of Horn of Africa region. The fact that the Prime Minister and his delegation haven't been allowed to leave, according to Yemeni media reports in the last day or two, really is a sign from the UAE that they are here to stay. The unloading of heavy artillery on the island for the first time, again, is very much the UAE flexing its muscle and showing that they have designs which are definitely at odds with the Hadi government, even though on paper they are allied in the fight against the Houthis on the mainland.
Bethan, it's due to you that we have a lot of this knowledge of what's happening on Socotra. You've managed to find out about the UAE troop build-up and possibly more about the intention. So tell us what it is that you saw from a military point of view and what you see as their strategy there.
From a military point of view, there's at least one base on the island. That's not new information. The UAE did admit that in May last year. What is not known is who exactly is operating from there. We know that Emirati troops are sent there for intensive first aid and battlefield training, and then they go on to fight on the mainland. It's not clear whether there are any specialized troops there, whether there are any secret black sites there, the way that the UAE has been alleged by the Associated Press to be operating from Eritrea and quite a few places in southern Yemen. And it's not clear what the relationship is between the Emirati military presence on the island and the Yemeni government's forces on the island. It did seem, locals told us that government and soldiers' salaries are being topped up by the UAE on top of what they earn from the government in Aden. But as we've seen in the last couple of days, it looks like any of the soldiers stationed there who are from the Yemeni mainland have been kicked out and sent home, or at least that appears to be the plan, according to what quite a few sources who are there at the moment have told me. So, like I say, it's not just hard power there. There are no Houthis to fight. There's no indication that the island could become the front for anything violent, but it's most definitely an extension of what they're doing in southern Yemen. And like I say, the build-up of the military and the fact that Emirati commanders do walk around the town quite freely and have been a presence for some time now shows that little by little the Emirates really have taken control of this place politically as well as militarily.
Mohammed, the Hadi government has called this an act of hostility, and I'm just wondering where this leaves the government, because it's quite an extraordinary statement, isn't it, if you've got your own troops walking around stopping the Prime Minister from leaving when it comes to the question of sovereignty, for example.
Well, as we said earlier, the relationship between the Emiratis and Hadi's government is not that it's not that good, and there are many concerns from Hadi's point of view regarding the Emiratis' behavior in the south and in Socotra. It seems that the Emiratis are not happy with the movements done by Mr. bin Daghar, the Prime Minister, recently when he moved from Aden to Al-Mukalla, Hadramaut, and Abyan, and he went to this Far Island, which is controlled by the Emiratis now. So they are not seemingly happy of these movements. They want to say that any sort of movement, any sort of action on the ground must be taken permission from the Emiratis. Now, there are some reports today that the Saudis sent a committee to see the situation there. They are going to talk, as the report says, to the Prime Minister, who is still there in Hadibo, which is the capital of this island. And they are going to talk to the Emiratis there to try to reconcile and solve this problem.
Okay, Samuel, where do you think this leaves Saudi Arabia? They are sending a delegation to Socotra, but alongside that, you've got their relationship with the UAE, which has been strained because of the UAE's gaining of power in Yemen, the fact that the UAE is supporting the Southern Transitional Council in the south of the country.
I think that this leaves Saudi Arabia in quite a difficult position because Saudi Arabia and the UAE alliance was seen as the cornerstone of their strategy towards the Gulf. And December 5th, they crystallized that into a coherent doctrine. So now these latent tensions over Yemen, now that they've exploded, Saudi Arabia needs to mitigate the damage. It needs to enter a damage control mode. It needs to convince the UAE that acting unilaterally by supporting the South Yemenis and then by supporting any other groups that oppose Hadi, whether it be in Socotra or elsewhere in the country, is just arming and emboldening the Houthis and Iranian-backed forces. So the Saudi Arabians, first of all, want to have held dialogue in Socotra to reestablish a sense of unity and consensus about who their real big enemy is and why they have to stay united to confront that. And secondly, I think that Saudi Arabia will foment any kind of pro-Hadi demonstrations like the ones we've been seeing in Socotra against the UAE military occupation to convince the UAE that the costs of intervening unilaterally and violating Yemen's sovereignty in this way are too high and that they must stay the course within the GCC. I mean, this is an part of a broader ideological struggle between Mohammed bin Zayed's secular vision and Mohammed bin Salman's vision of just containing Iran, Sunni nationalism. And this is going to, and Socotra and South Yemen are major theaters in this, and Saudi Arabia wants to get the upper hand in this diplomatic struggle. Okay,
now let's take a closer look at the UAE's military role in Yemen and North Africa, and we really see an interesting picture forming here, and my guests have touched on this. Now, the country has bases along the southern coast of Yemen. The main port city of Aden is dominated by UAE-backed separatists. On the African side of the Red Sea, it operates the Asab naval and air base in Eritrea. The UAE is building a military base in Berbera, Somalia's breakaway region of Somaliland, and Dubai's DP World has signed a 30-year deal to manage the Berbera port, an agreement that has not been recognized by the Somali government in Mogadishu. The UAE is also developing the port of Bosaso in Puntland, another part of Somalia, whose self-governing status is not internationally recognized. The UAE is training and equipping the local maritime police force there, but its relations have soured with Somalia. Last month, Mogadishu disbanded a UAE program to train some of its troops soon after it seized millions of dollars from a UAE plane. Now, when you look at the Horn of Africa, and I know we've touched on it briefly, and you look at the multiple players involved there, not just the UAE, Saudi Arabia, we've got France and China and the US and Qatar and increasingly Turkey. It's quite a worrying picture coming from there, isn't it? I mean, you really see a buildup of control, and it's all about, I guess, access to these seaways, these ports.
Yeah, 100%. This is sort of what modern empire building looks like in the 21st century, I guess. And we're seeing the UAE evolving into what used to be quite content, a group of nations that used to be quite content to be led by Saudi Arabia, the big brother in the region. But in the aftermath of the Arab Spring, has realized that maybe these existing structures are not as solid as they were previously, and therefore is become one of the most interventionist players in the entire region. What you're seeing is the buying up and the monopolizing of all of these ports along the Red Sea, even actually as far as Limassol in the Eastern Mediterranean, all the way into the Indian Ocean. It is definitely a big game plan. But a lot of these places are sort of under the radar of most news organizations and most Western powers. They're not places with significant assets. They're not places where wars are being fought anymore necessarily. But this is why Socotra, I think, has become the epicenter of this strategy. It's almost become a sort of Crimea-esque situation where both the soft pull towards the UAE and the UAE's money is quite beguiling for Socotra's residents. They have been long marginalized by the mainland government. They were left to fend for themselves, basically, after these two huge cyclones ripped across the island in 2015. They destroyed 80% of the island's roads. They made 1/3 of the population homeless, and Hadi's government did almost nothing to alleviate that. So the fact that the UAE has come along offering healthcare, offering to rebuild schools, offering, in some cases it appears that Socotris are getting special work visas to go to Abu Dhabi, and this is a place where unemployment is rife, where people are very poor, and the Riyal has obviously suffered a lot in the last couple of years due to the conflict. These are all things that are 100% pulls towards the UAE away from the mainland Yemeni government. And it's, I think, maybe something that gets lost in this discussion is, yes, this is an ideological battle between the major powers, between Abu Dhabi, between Riyadh, between the government that supposedly sits in Aden. But on the ground, Socotris themselves are very often quite ambivalent towards the state of Yemen, or the modern state as it currently exists. They feel like they've been ignored for a very long time. And this is one of the major reasons the UAE has been able to get a foothold here, is because they've offered people the things that Yemen was not offering them. So if you're looking at the way modern power plays out in this part of the world, then it makes a lot of sense from an on-the-ground perspective, definitely.
Okay, so they feel they've been ignored, and you're confirming that they indeed have, Samuel. Money talks. If you look at what's happening in Socotra, in Yemen, in the Horn of Africa, and the players there throwing money at troops. We've got, plane loads of cash that have been stopped, a UAE plane in the Horn of Africa. And I'm just wondering how this plays out as far as the blockade is concerned with Qatar, because Qatar's also got interests there. Qatar and Turkey versus the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and the other players there.
Yeah, I agree. This is a very interesting complication that the UAE and Saudi Arabia are having dissension and discord over Socotra. Because if you look at this purely from a realist geopolitical perspective, it would be in their interest to stay united. One of the big reasons why the UAE has reacted so strongly to the plane load seizure of money of $10 million, and there's been this diplomatic crisis, is because Somalia is not only aligned with Turkey, but is also aligned with Qatar and has given them de facto support within the Arab League against the blockade. So I think that ultimately, this is going to be a broader struggle between Turkey and Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the UAE for control, which ever since the coup in July 2016 has been burgeoning over the course of this region. Turkey has a stronghold in Somalia, but Somaliland and Ethiopia seem to be leaning towards the UAE, at least, and Saudi Arabia has a foothold in Djibouti. I think as of now, in terms of
Ethiopia really seems to be playing all players. Sorry, excuse me, jumping in there. Plays all players, don't they? As does Djibouti.
Djibouti is an interesting case over here. I think that China obviously has the upper hand over in Djibouti, just in general, simply because of its control of the military base. And now it's asking to build a port in March, which would be, if it has it, would probably surpass anything the UAE has in Berbera. And it's an indifferent stakeholder, so it has an advantage. Beyond them, the UAE is probably the second most powerful actor there, and the Saudis have a military base there, as well as the US having a crucial military installation and supply facility that would probably act towards the defense of the UAE interests there, because they both are interested in countering terrorism in the Sahel. So I think that the US and the UAE are probably going to be combating against China for supremacy in Djibouti, just because of a nature of strategic interest and a desire to contain China in Africa, in spite of the Trump administration's relatively undeveloped African strategy.
Mohammed, a weakened Yemen obviously plays into what's happening in the Horn of Africa and the discourse there. When it comes to political developments between these players, the proxy wars, the potential proxy wars, growing proxy wars, where are we?
This is the problem now because we have so many factions in Yemen, so many parties, conflicting parties, and there is no way for one of these parties to win this war. And at the same time, there is no way of any of them could think of a political solution, peaceful solution. And because it is sort of a regional war, it's difficult for the inside factions to decide because the decision is sometimes outside. Now we can refer back to the what the Martin Griffiths said about the importance of the political solution, peaceful solution, and how difficult it is unless or if the regional powers like Iran, Saudis, Emirates, and some other international powers like United States and Russia could agree to a political solution in Yemen. It's difficult for the Yemenis themselves to bring back peace to their country, especially when we find this war is expanding and it takes different ways and it takes different agenda and so many factions being merged during this war, so many militias. It's difficult to say when are we going to take the first step towards the peaceful solution, as long as the Yemenis inside and the regional powers thinking that the military solution will be the way.
The military solution being the way, whether it's in Yemen, the Horn of Africa, also the interest in Sahel. But Bethan, if we can just look at Socotra and if this plays out in Socotra and how important an island this is away from its military potential as a launching pad. I mean, it's fragile ecosystem and what it means for the world.
Socotra is it's a very delicate, closed ecosystem. It's the last remnants of subtropical forest, which is about 20 million years old. It's been treasured by conservationists and biologists since modern-day exploration of its species and its flora and fauna began. But access has always been very difficult. The island's been under threat by human activity for at least the last 200 years. The archipelago's sort of gradually drying out, which is changing the climate, which is already quite arid. And there's overgrazing and lots of the really precious dragon's blood trees that are endemic to the island, they don't grow anywhere else, have been felled for making room for homes and for pasture and that kind of thing. But when the airstrip to connecting the island to mainland Yemen was built in 1999, a lot of conservationists have said that that really sped up the effects that we were already seeing damaging the ecosystem on the island. And now that the Emirates are there, what many people are very worried about is that there might be this large-scale development. For example, one Emirati businessman that my reporting partner and I came across told us that he was going to build 5-star hotels across the island. And it currently has very little infrastructure that would support that. So the question is, how on earth can something like that be achieved, which could be actually a positive development for the island if it was managed properly and if it brought jobs and it brought income and it brought more prosperity to its residents. But there's so little known about what the UAE's long-term plans are, whether it wants Socotra to be just a military base or a military base come holiday resort. I mean, it is a paradise. There's nowhere like it on earth. It's definitely a sort of jewel in the Emirates' crown if it suddenly becomes this kind of 8th sort of vassal emirate.
Okay, let's leave it there,
in.
Beth, and I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thanks very much for that, talking about the growing victims of this Yemen war. Samuel Romani, Bethan McKernan, and Mohammed Jumeh. Thank you very much for your thoughts on this. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. You can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Handle is at AJ Inside Story. Mine is at Jane Dutton. Good to have you with us. Bye-bye.